Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. Politico. This is the latest article in Politico. Trump loses long shot bid to challenge hush money conviction in federal court. It's a very good thing. You might ask, well, why is this a good thing? Hit subscribe. We'll talk about it. If you scroll down, all the way down, then it goes, the maximum sentence for falsifying business records is 4 years in prison. It was a misdemeanor elevated to a felony. The felony was a federal crime that the federal government did not level against Trump. The FEC dropped the case. The Department of Justice didn't even level a case against Trump. The state of New York unilaterally decided that Trump committed a federal crime to elevate the misdemeanor. This is, of course, unconstitutional. It will be overturned. It's already essentially been overturned because of the immunity victory by the Supreme Court. The federal judge stated, well, it's still, it wasn't an official act. It's not for the federal judge to decide whether or not speaking to an attorney is an official act. Furthermore, the jurisdiction is not within New York to decide what a federal crime is. Anyway, the point, however, is that this moves up to the Supreme Court, eventually moves up to the Supreme Court. This happened all throughout, by the way, the Colorado decision, the immunity decision. Federal courts ruled against Trump. I repeat, federal courts routinely ruled against Trump. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. What happened when federal courts stated Colorado had a right to ban Trump? What happened when federal courts stated that Trump did not have presidential constitutional immunity? What happened is, this is a rhetorical question. If you watch this channel, I basically focus on two things, the Supreme Court and the stock market and the economy. We'll talk about both today. But what happened was, it went up to the Supreme Court. So you needed this federal court to say no. Okay? It's actually better in a way for the federal court. I mean, it would be, the best would be if the federal court said, okay, you're right, conviction overturned. But it's still good for Trump because it goes up to the Supreme Court and they make it, they make Supreme Court precedent actually defending Trump, which is the opposite of what Democrats want, but it usually happens. So let's get to how it eventually gets to the Supreme Court. The federal court denied Trump. And it says here, any sentence could be put on hold while Trump appeals. That's the issue right here. Any sentence could be put on hold while Trump appeals. The appeal goes straight to the Supreme Court. It went straight to the Supreme Court with the Colorado ban, went straight to the Supreme Court with the immunity issue. It'll go straight to the Supreme Court with this unconstitutional conviction. The only way it really does is when he gets sentenced, because the court doesn't really want to weigh in on this until the sentencing. This is Mark Levin explaining how the court overturns the case and looks at the case.
Has been met, and that's the end of it in Florida. Is far more extraordinary than anything Donald Trump and his lawyers would be asking the Supreme Court to do. Why? These are federal law, federal constitutional violations, federal jurisdictional violations by an acting state judge and a prosecutor, by two people. And it's ongoing. Sentencing and other issues have to be decided by the local judge, and then the appellate level, and then the level after that. This is an ongoing violation. It doesn't even matter what the final court has to say. Again, if I'm Donald Trump's lawyers, I go through that process, but you go to the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, how do we get to the Supreme Court of the United States? This is where people get bogged down.
How we get there, any sentence could be put on hold while Trump appeals. Politico, I believe this is today. Okay, or no, yesterday. Article from yesterday. Trump loses bid to challenge hush money conviction in federal court. Trump lost his bid to challenge Colorado ban, the Colorado ban, and the immunity issue against the special counsel numerous times. Federal courts are not going to side with Trump. They're going to side with the special counsel. They'll side with Democrats in New York. The Supreme Court overturned all of those federal courts because at each moment during this saga against Trump, what they were doing was blatantly unconstitutional. The federal courts that sided with Colorado, the federal courts that sided with the special counsel on immunity, it was all unconstitutional. You actually had federal courts upholding unconstitutional activity. All right. Like I said, scroll down, you see any sentence can be put on hold while Trump appeals. Mark Levin is explaining right now, he gets sentenced. That is the fastest way. So September 18th is when he gets sentenced. The Supreme Court either immediately looks at the sentencing and overturns the conviction, or if the sentencing is after November, that's actually perfect for Trump because he becomes president. And whether or not he'll become president, but if the whole point of getting Trump and sentencing Trump is to get him in jail. They want to see him in jail. Now, if they can't put him in jail before November, Trump has a 95% chance. And then if they actually try to put him in Rikers for a day, he has a 96% chance of winning. I don't see Harrison Waltz winning with this economy and a market collapse on, up ahead. I think the stock market will collapse, I believe, unfortunately, because of Harris and Biden's policies, or Harris's price controls and Harris's tax plan and Harris's taxes on unrealized gains. The stock market is going to absolutely tank a week to 2 weeks before November because of the unrealized capital gains. That unrealized capital gains is a nightmare for Wall Street, which will in turn, unfortunately, become a nightmare for people on Main Street. But let's continue.
There are writs at common law, and it really doesn't matter which writ you follow. Here's a piece by former Attorney General Griffin Bell. He would later become Attorney General under Jimmy Carter. In the Southern Methodist University Law School Law Review, the federal appellate courts and all writs. And it discusses what these common law writs are. Now, it discusses it in the context of a specific statute, the All Writs Act, that was passed as part of the original Judiciary Act in 1789. Not to get into the weeds, we're smart, we can follow this. The peremptory common law writs are among the most potent weapons in the judicial arsenal. These common law writs are used. They're rare, but they're used more and more within the federal chain of courts. So what does he say here? Well, the basis for general judicial supervision over inferior federal courts, through extraordinary or peremptory writs can be found in early common law. The All Writs Act is a direct descendant of the Judiciary Act of 1789, other than the Supreme Court, which is created by the Constitution. Everything else is created by Congress. All the other courts, the number of courts, how many justices are on the Supreme Court. It granted federal courts the power to issue extraordinary writs in aid of their respective jurisdictions. And while it is clear that the All Writs Act authorizes the issuance of the traditional common law writs of mandamus and prohibitions, the phrase all writs also encompasses common law certiorari, injunctions, subpoenas. Don't worry about all that. What that really means is there's many ways of characterizing this direct appeal to the Supreme Court and relaying the facts and relaying what's taken place under the law to the court. In fact, you can use multiple requests for writs. It says choosing the correct writ to obtain the desired relief is no longer necessary in the federal courts. Different writs may be sought alternatively or cumulatively. The choice is now unimportant. The subtle distinctions among the various writs have no effect on their relative usefulness as vehicles for interlocutory review. We're not seeking interlocutory review at the federal level, but in effect we are of the state court's activities. Hello, before you finish on the state side, we have some big questions that the Supreme Court needs to answer. The jurisdictional prerequisite for application of the All Writs Act is simply that the writ be necessary, appropriate, in aid of the jurisdiction of the issuing court. The Supreme Court in Labai versus Howes-Letber Company explained the power of the courts of appeals under the Act. Quote, the question of naked power has long been settled by this court. Since the Court of Appeals could at some stage of the proceedings entertain appeals in these cases, it is power in proper circumstances to issue writs of mandamus reaching them. This is an expression of prospective or concurrent appellate jurisdiction. The power of the courts of appeals to issue writs is not limited to cases where an appeal has already been filed. Rather, this power of review extends to all proceedings where the actions of the trial judge at some future stage of the litigation may be reviewable. That applies to the federal chain. But as I explained here, we have violations of federal law, of federal constitutional provisions by a state court. Now, does the Supreme Court, does the federal government ever get involved in state court decisions or state law decisions or state regulatory decisions? You better believe it. There are things called express federal preemption, which is what we have here. Federal Constitution, federal due process rights, federal equal protection rights under the Constitution as applies to the states. Federal jurisdiction under the federal election law, under a federal presidential election, and I could go on and on and on.
The state of New York lacked jurisdiction to decide unilaterally on a federal crime. The federal government was not involved in this. There was a DOJ employee or official that was part of the prosecution, but he worked at the state level. He left to the federal government, then worked at the state level. The federal government was not involved in Trump's prosecution or conviction, yet he was convicted under federal crimes. How does that work? That's unconstitutional. It's never happened before. All of these things have never happened before. That's why the Supreme Court consistently and routinely sides with Trump, because there's such blatant attempts at rewriting the Constitution. Trump has already received 4 major Supreme Court victories. One overturning the Colorado ban. The second one with the constitutional presidential immunity that forced the special counsel to rewrite the indictment, and they're going to have to rewrite it again. Okay, when they first wrote the indictment, it was unconstitutional. They were trying to go after Trump for official acts. It's an official act as president to perform a speech. Sorry, Democrats, if you think the speech is full of lies, you should look at your own speeches. See how many lies are told there. When Biden promised to stay in the contest, was that true or false? Just recently, after he had won his primary, was that also true? Did he actually win his primary in delegates? Oh, okay. It's endless, the number of lies being told by Democrats who then hyperventilate when they talk about Trump and lying. Infinitely more lies are told by Democrats than Trump, or than Trump tells. Trump engages in hyperbole. Democrats engage in grandiose deception. The primary, for example, is one obvious example. And then accusing Trump of being a Kremlin operative is another. But anyway, we can go on forever. The point is, the state of New York does not have the right to convict Trump on a federal crime. They just don't have the right to do so. Let's continue.
You have implied federal preemption. You have states that are obstructing federal preemption. You have all this litigation of precedential activity that's taken place before that gives the Supreme Court jurisdiction. A state cannot regulate Congress, which is what it's doing in that court when it takes over authority for determining what a federal election violation is. That's important. Or the Equal Protection Clause, or the Due Process Clause, or the First Amendment Free Speech Clause about a non-disclosure agreement. Federal courts, starting with the Supreme Court, have intervened in state actions before. Civil rights issues, death penalty issues, Bush versus Gore, a presidential election issue, where you have federal jurisdiction issues. And how have they used it? Well, the Supremacy Clause, they've used the Commerce Clause, they've used the Necessary and Proper Clause. When it comes to regulating federal elections, especially a presidential election, Congress has exclusive plenary power, and the Supreme Court has overall authority. When you have an extraordinary.
So Congress, the federal government, is in charge of making federal laws on presidential contests, federal laws passed by Congress, not by the state of New York or the state of any state, or the state of Colorado, for example. So he got a Colorado victory overturning the ban. He got a victory on immunity. He got a victory that Justice Jackson sided with as well. The January defendants were sentenced in an unconstitutional manner. Okay, when Democrats, when people aligned with Democratic Party ideology, when they cause chaos and mayhem, virtually nothing happens. You had, let's just be algorithmically, you had two law students, I believe they were law students, left-leaning law students 4 years ago, when there were curfews and there was chaos and mayhem every single day and Democrats didn't care, throwing an incendiary at a police vehicle. I believe it was in New York. They didn't even get prison time. I don't believe, now don't quote me on this, I don't believe they got prison time. I'm trying to speak in an algorithmically friendly manner. I don't believe they even received prison time. Could you imagine if two Trumpers threw a, you-know-what, at a police vehicle? God bless the bled. I'm trying to explain what I'm trying to tell you how it would sound in media if two Trump supporters threw that at a police vehicle. Okay, could you imagine? But you had left-leaning, and then you had so many examples of people trying to remove Make America Great Again hats from young people, and they didn't get prison. I mean, it's just the left is they say that all the political chaos is from the right. It's so not true at all. Not true at all for a number of reasons. But anyway, let's continue. This will go to the Supreme Court. The fact that the federal court stated that they're not going to look at it is the best thing to happen. Well, it's a good thing for Trump. The best thing is the federal court sided with Trump, but the federal courts don't side with Trump. They didn't with Colorado. They didn't with the immunity. And then the Supreme Court, of course, overruled the federal courts, the state court. The Supreme Court. Why do you think Democrats want to abolish or, add justices to the Supreme Court? Because the Supreme Court is the one thing that stops them from trying to persecute Trump. The Supreme Court looks and says, yeah, it's unconstitutional. You can't do this. And the Democrats say, oh, my God, they're authoritarians. An authoritarian to Democrats is the Supreme Court actually saying that Democrats are engaging in unconstitutional behavior, and then that is the authoritarianism that they claim exists.
Radical, extreme, multitudinous case of violations of federal law, whether it's substantive, whether it's process, whether it's jurisdiction. This is the case. Me, as I said first out of the gate, I'd file common law writs. I'd file a writ of prohibition that restrains a body exercising public power from exceeding its powers or usurping jurisdiction, which it does not have. It seems like this. You could file a writ of mandamus, ordering a lower court, in this case the state courts, to stay their actions while the court considers it. It might go with a writ of certiorari, arguing that there is a statutory basis for it. It doesn't matter. You've got to take it to the door of the Supreme Court. They will decide whether to take it or not. And if they don't, shame on them. Because if there was...
They'll take it just like they took, and Mark Levin explains it brilliantly. They will take it, though. And a precursor to them taking is what just happened the other day. The federal court says, no, everything is just fine. And then we find out it's not. It's unconstitutional. So this is a very good thing for Trump, even though what benefits Trump always looks like it wouldn't benefit a normal politician, but because Trump is fighting an uphill battle always, and the Supreme Court is at the end of the road whenever it comes to a major decision regarding Trump, they're always going to side with Trump because what's happening to him is so blatantly illegal and unconstitutional. Supreme Court number one, and then the price controls and the unrealized taxes on unrealized capital gains. Harris's economic policy is going to tank the stock market even before November. Let's listen to this.
You know, if they were price gouging, wouldn't the profit margin be 30% instead of 1.2%? I mean, this whole thing is absurd. The Washington Post directly cited communism about this in its story, saying it's hard to exaggerate how bad this is, that it's going to lead to shortages, black markets, and hoarding. Let's bring in, for his reaction, former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Kevin Hassett. Kevin, always wonderful to see you, sir. When you saw this plan, what was your reaction?
Honestly, I was horrified. This is incredibly chilling. You know, a lot of the sort of reasonable Democratic economists, like my good friend Jason Furman, are out there saying, well, they're not really going to do it. But if you look at Kamala Harris's record, you know, she's for Medicare for all, doing so you can't have your health insurance. She wants everybody to have a guaranteed job. She's got all these socialist policies that she's been walking back over the last couple of weeks. And now they come out, now you know why they don't let her speak in public. She comes out with the craziest, silliest, and most economically illiterate proposal in the history of presidential politics. And honestly, she wants the government to set prices, and she really wants them to. That's the chilling thing. If she becomes president, this is going to be policy. You're going to go to the grocery store, and it won't be there, or if it is there, the shelves will be empty. That's what happens when the government sets prices. I actually wrote a chapter in the economic report of the president, or my staff did, when I was in the White House, that showed that when the government starts setting food prices, then that's when people start having famines and stuff, because the people who produce food can't afford to do so because the government pays them less than the cost. It's just terrible.
I mean, it's being called remarkably, absurdly idiotic, breathtakingly idiotic. And it took her 4 years to come up with this. I mean, this is after her running mate, Tim Walz, called socialism, quote, neighborliness. You know, she's copying Senator Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders. Kevin, the irony today is grocery giant Kroger just promised to cut prices by $1 billion after its merger with Albertsons. Let me back up. Let's watch Catherine Rampell of the Washington Post on this and listen to former President Trump. Watch this.
What that would mean, which basically says, like, it's not going to be markets, it's not going to be supply and demand that's determining how much your grocery store charges you for milk or for eggs. It's going to be some bureaucrat in DC, which seems like totally unworkable, first of all, for the FTC to be deciding like how much Kroger charges for eggs in Michigan. But it also would be very bad for markets. We've seen this kind of thing tried in lots of other countries before: Venezuela, Argentina, the Soviet Union, etc. It leads to shortages. It leads to black markets. Plenty of uncertainty.
Now Kamala is reportedly proposing communist price controls. She wants price controls. And if they worked, I'd go along with it too, but they don't work. They actually have the exact opposite impact and effect. But it leads to food shortages, rationing, hunger, dramatically more inflation. Their Inflation Reduction Act, by the way, was a disaster. It's what caused the inflation. Their Inflation Reduction Act was a con job. They actually admitted that it wasn't really for inflation that they did it.
Yeah, it was for climate change. Price fixing is already illegal. Kevin, what's next? Price controls on car insurance, baby food, pet food.
Oh, sure.
I mean, all are up double digits under Biden and Harris.
Right. Well, the fact is that Harris's proposal is modeled after a proposal by Elizabeth Warren that's so open-ended that the government could basically set the price for everything.
So you have prices going up for everything from gas, electricity, fuel, airfare, groceries, eating out, car insurance. They're going to set the price for everything. Everything is up. So what industry are they talking about? There's every single industry in the U.S. economy, every single one, prices are up. So They keep saying, well, there are corporations that are price gouging. Well, then why didn't you go after them during Biden's administration? Oh, that's right. You're lying. Yet another lie that's never pointed out by media. But how are you going to set the price for gas or electricity or rent when you've created these problems? So now you want to actually exacerbate the dilemma by price fixing? They don't even have a functioning primary.
It's so open-ended that the government could basically set the price for everything. And so if you think that this is just, something that's going to take the far left people and make sure that they're ready to vote for her, no, this is a serious proposal. In fact, while she's out there talking about this price gouging, she's also bragging about the price setting that the government has done in the prescription drug space. And my colleague Thomas Phillipson wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal a few days ago that showed that because of the price fixing of the Biden-Harris administration, then millions of seniors are going to lose their drug benefits. You could go through that article and see about how that works. But she's bragging about having fixed other prices, and she's, copying a bill that wants to fix every price.
Well, she wasn't picked by Democrat primary voters, so this is what the party is stuck with: absolute abject stupidity. Kevin, if you could please just stay with us for just a bit more. We got to get to this story. Okay, coming up next, turning to this. Harris also said the government should subsidize housing with even more of your money. Didn't that get the U.S. into the banking and financial crisis, triggering the Great Recession in 2008? More of this same poison? It's so dumb. Grady Trimble standing by live in D.C. with more. Grady.
Hey, Liz, Vice President Harris says this plan she laid out today will help get 3 million homes built in the next 4 years to bring down the cost to buy or rent a home. Here's some of what's in that plan: a tax incentive for building starter homes, a $40 billion fund to spur housing construction. She wants to cut red tape, stop Wall Street investors from bulk buying.
The housing market is affected also by the lack of a southern border. That's also an issue. When you have millions and millions of people who want houses, suddenly supply shrinks and demand goes up. But not just that. The most important issue is the fact that we have double the interest rates for mortgages. We have double the mortgage rates. So you have increased the Fed funds rate, which affects everything. You're paying more for Democrats. Interest rates went from virtually 0 to 5.5% for the Fed funds rate, which increased mortgage rates to close to 7% or 7% for 30 years. It was 3% and less under Trump for mortgage rates. You're paying double for your mortgage payment every month. That's the difference in a major city the difference of, let's say, $4,000 or even $5,000 a month to $10,000 a month. If you could barely afford a mortgage of $4,000 or $3,000 a month, and it goes to $8,000 because Biden's administration ignored inflation, said it was temporary, okay, how on earth is a $40 billion fund for housing construction going to... It's like, what does that have to do with the fact that people can't afford their mortgage payments? I mean, it's these... Okay, the people who are creating these policies are doing so to mask the fact, to circumvent the reality that they caused these problems. Okay, they caused these problems. Then they say, well, we're gonna make sure that we fix these problems, but they're not doing so from an actual economic standpoint. They're doing so just from pumping more money into the system, which created the inflation to begin with.
Buying homes, and she wants to help with first-time home buyers' down payments.
While we work on the housing shortage, my administration will provide first-time home buyers with $25,000 to help with the down payment on a new home.
Then sellers just raise the price of the home they're selling by $25,000. Also, again, in a major city in this country, the mortgage rates are double what they were under Trump. Double, over double. So if you moved into an area where it's a $3,000 a month mortgage and you could barely afford that, it's now $6,000 a month. You double the mortgages of 99% of Americans. They're not going to be able to afford it. That's what took place under Biden and Harris. But Trump is mean, so we can't have good things.
We can do this. We can do this.
She says we can do this, but there are questions about whether Harris could if elected, because a lot of these proposals would require congressional approval. They'd also likely lead to more government spending.
John, thank you. By the way, everybody, I have thank you so much to my super chat. John, thank you so much. Paul Bartlett, thank you as always. I have a live stream tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, so be here also. Be here at 10 p.m. Eastern, everybody.
And maybe more inflation, according to some folks, including investor and author David Bahnsen. Here's what he says. Giving people $25,000 to buy a home does not make a home price cheaper. It makes a home cost, well, about $25,000 more. Points out the housing affordability crisis is on the supply side. Feeding more demand with increased deficit spending, he says, is the opposite of what this situation calls for. And at his press conference last night, former President Trump said he'll tackle the housing crisis by opening up federal lands to build houses, getting rid of unnecessary regulations, and improving supply chains. And by the way, Liz, the Harris proposal also includes opening up federal land, so maybe some bipartisan support there, although Republicans are blasting the rest of it. Liz?
Thank you, Grady Trimble. Okay, let's welcome to the show.
So none of it's going to work. None of it makes sense. None of this makes economic sense. You give $25,000 for a home, the average home is going to sell for $25,000 more. Okay? You raise minimum wage, then you're going to get corporations circumventing that and laying off people. Every type of Democratic Party trick, economic trick, or this attempt at trying to deceive the actual market, it's not going to work. None of these things work. So, like for the minimum wage, they're like, oh, we have to minimum wage. Well, why is there poverty, Bernie, in areas of the country run by Democrats that have been impoverished for decades? Why? Why is there poverty? They always have these, we're going to study the root causes of this issue. What are the root causes of poverty in areas of the country run by Democrats for decades? It's not the minimum wage. There are a lot of reasons. No manufacturing jobs, a whole lot of reasons. But they caused the inflation by pumping money into the economy because they shut down economic activity. That was the real cause. Now they're trying to pump more money into the economy, hoping that inflation goes down. Milton Friedman explained, you pump more money into the economy, inflation doesn't go down, it goes up. You reduce the value of your currency. That's one issue also.
Happy with Kamala Harris's price-fixing plan. They say it'll just make problems worse. Bar rescue guy John Taffer joins me now. John, welcome back. We've heard from various industries, and they all told us, look, price controls don't work. All right, what about the restaurant business? You're in it. What happens?
Oh, Stuart, it's a nightmare. Good to be back, by the way. Think of a hamburger, Stuart. First of all, there's thousands of different hamburgers a restaurant can buy. There's prime, there's choice, there's different shapes, different sizes, there's filet mignon, there's prime rib, every blend, every type you can think about. So she has to send an analyst in to price every type of hamburger. Then the rancher's costs can't go up, Stuart. His price for feed, electronics, must remain the same so he can sell it to the processing plant. Then the processing plant's costs can't go up. They have to stay exactly the same. Fuel, equipment, transportation, labor. Then when it goes to the distributor, his costs can't go up. Fuel, distribution, union, all the other costs associated with his business. Then the restaurant gets the hamburger in a price-controlled way. Now I have a question, Stuart. What about the bun? What about the tomato? What about the lettuce? What about the ketchup? What happens then? I mean, it becomes absurd. You cannot accomplish this. And when we look at past countries that have done it, Stuart, shortages happen. If the bun guy can't make money, he stops making buns. So the supply side impact is massive. It's an absurd premise. The fact that it's being presented as a policy is as absurd as the premise itself.
Okay, next case. Harris wants to raise the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. What would that do to
all of her economic policies are going to cause a stock market collapse in late October, because what's going to happen is they're going to say that Harris is up, Trump is on the ropes, Trump's not going to win, he's down by 4 nationally. And then it gets closer to price controls and taxes on unrealized capital gains and corporate tax rates hikes, which will do nothing but hurt the economy. Then the market gets petrified and tanks. And when it tanks, that cements Trump's victory, just like it did with President Obama in 2008.
to your business?
Well, Stuart, that's taking 7% of the profits that we make out of our pockets. Those dollars are used for upgrades, for remodeling, for employee raises, for systems, for marketing, research and development, all of these things. A communist country, China, is 3% lower than us. So two things, Stuart. From the business standpoint, of course, it's a disaster. We're going to see reductions in payroll, reductions in other ways, price increases, things to offset that impact. From an American standpoint, how do we compete in a global marketplace when our companies are paying a higher tax rate than our largest competitor that is a communist government, and they're 3 points lower? Stuart, it destroys the business on a local basis, and it weakens America's economy on a global basis. These are policies that make no sense. Stuart, when you start to put these things together, words like catastrophe appear. And that's the most horrifying of all. These decisions can't be made on an isolated basis. They have to be made on a collective basis that puts us on a plan to move forward.
Or anti-business socialism. That's what I'll call it. John Taffer,
exactly
don't be
right.
a stranger, sir. We'll like your input. Come back soon.
So none of the things they're talking, you could forget about having a barbecue. If a barbecue for like 20 people costs, let's say, $300 or so, you could over double that. I mean, do people have money for a $600 to $700 barbecue? No. That's what would take place with price controls.
I am proposing that we change the tax code so for every family that is making less than $100,000 a year, they will receive a tax credit that they can collect up to $500 a month, which will make all the difference between those families being able to get through the end of the month with dignity and with support or not. And on day one, I will repeal that.
That's the one thing if you make a family making less than $100,000 and they get $500 a month, if there was a way to do that through tax credits, I actually would agree with that. I don't know how how would that happen though? She doesn't explain how it happens. Like what's the accounting behind that? But I do agree that actually, if you make less than 100,000, you have a family of 4 or 5. But she doesn't explain how that works.
Tax bill that benefits the top 1% and the biggest corporations of America.
By the way, she was vice president, and her administration, Biden's administration, did not do any of these things. So,
and I actually feel very strongly about this, is that we need to have Medicare for all. Having a system.
We don't even have Medicare for all on the state level. Again, none of these policies they agree with or they believe. It's all a facade or a racket to get left-leaning Americans to vote Democrat no matter what. Vote blue no matter who. They say Trump lies. Nobody lies more than Democratic politicians speaking to their own constituents.
That makes a difference in terms of who receives what based on your income is unconscionable, it is cruel, and in many situations that I have witnessed, inhumane.
That's Kamala Harris' 2019 campaign proposals and her record in the Senate in focus as she hits the campaign trail this week. In the past, the vice president pushed for increased taxes across the board to pay for progressive programs such as Medicare for All. This includes bumping capital gains taxes to 35%, increasing the estate tax. If Harris is able to secure the presidency and implement any of these policies, what impact could it have on the economy and middle-class Americans? Joining me now, Americans for Tax Reform President Grover Norquist. Grover, thanks very much for joining us this weekend. What kind of proposals are you expecting from Kamala Harris, and what kind of an impact might you expect?
She has a series of tax increases, many of them much worse, more radical, more devastating to the economy than even what Biden put forward. The Biden administration, along with Kamala, came out for a capital gains tax of 44.6%, 44.6%, twice China's. Who's going to invest in the United States if Kamala and Biden got their way on that one? The President Biden wants to take the corporate income tax from 21%, which is sort of competitive with Europe, up to 28%, higher than Europe, higher than China. Kamala has said 35%. She wants to take that rate up to 35%, which, of course, makes it significantly higher than China. Why would you invest or build a factory in the United States if we're at 35 and they're at 15 to 25? It'd be higher than anything in Europe, higher than Venezuela. She wants.
So the root causes of poverty are manufacturing jobs leaving lower socioeconomic areas of the country. Okay, a lot of poor areas of the country used to have a factory that employed, thousands of people. Now they don't have that factory. Those factories left in the 80s and 90s or 70s, or early 2000s. But they want to make it more difficult to open up a factory in those areas and employ people. So it's like Democrats almost want these communities to be impoverished.
She wants a carbon tax. She's been much clearer about the carbon tax even than Biden was. And the carbon tax leads inevitably to a value-added tax because they want to extend the tax on energy to all things, as they do in Europe. There is a financial transaction tax, which has usually been something out in left-wing Gaga land. She's endorsed that along with the senator from Vermont, who is out in Gaga land. And she holds hands with him and supports the idea of putting a tax every time there's a financial transaction in the country.
The vice president also pushed for universal basic income in her time as a U.S. senator. Harris proposed $2,000 monthly payments for Americans making less than $100,000 a year in 2020 and an additional $2,000 for up to 3 children. What effect would that kind of policy have on the U.S. taxpayer, Grover?
Well, it simply increases the number of people who become dependent on welfare and end up not working. One of the challenges we have in the Kamala Biden economy is that welfare payments are so high and inflation is so damaging to wages that people are not coming back to work.
Instead of universal basic income, you find out why an area of a state or a city or a county is impoverished. Why? Okay, I agree with some, like, the philosophy behind that for people who are families who are not making even 50,000, what's the poverty rate? Like 30,000, something like 28,000 or something like that a year for a family of 4 or 5. I forgot what I don't know what the poverty threshold is. I can look it up right now. But if you simply ask why a region of the country or an area of a state is impoverished, why? Democrats never look at, they look at the why for everything else. Oh, we're gonna have we're gonna discuss this or address the causes of this and see if this works. And well, why are regions of the country that Democrats preside over, why are they impoverished? Is it because manufacturing jobs have left, like we talked about? Well, why don't you get more manufacturing jobs into those regions? Why don't you give a tax incentive to companies to make these regions headquarters. So you might have a very poor area of a blue state that's run exclusively by Democrats, or a red state. And they say, well, universal basic income, that'll help. But the area is still impoverished. Why don't you give incentives to businesses to move into these places?
The percentage of the population of working age that is working is not growing. It's falling, and it's a significant problem that workers are not coming out to work because of things like Kamala's idea of throwing more welfare. She's also dropped the comment by Biden, the lie Biden told, that he'd only tax people who made less than $400,000, more than $400,000. I'm going to tax people who make more than $400,000. Then he said, well, actually, the married couple, it's only $200,000. Oh, and by the way, inflation is such that it goes even lower, that he has made people more and more susceptible. Her idea of the taxes she wants to raise, particularly on energy, will hit everyone. And the corporate income tax, as she well knows, is paid not by some guy named Mr. General Motors. It's paid by workers in lower wages directly. It's paid by all Americans in higher prices, and it's paid by retirees in reduced pensions, 401ks, IRAs that are damaged by those taxes. The corporate income tax hits middle America first and last. That's who pays it. The left likes it because it's a hidden tax, but it's a tax on middle America.
Yeah, Harris has also pushed radical health care policy. She's backing Medicare for all. I want to get your take on this. That abolishes private health insurance.
I can tell you from my days on the left, I was the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, according to the Huffington Post in 2015 and 2016, and the unofficial scribe of Sanders' most hardcore voters. Okay, I became a supporter of President Trump about 7 years ago, actually. Why? Because, well, 6 years ago, yeah. Because I want a better economy. We had record low poverty with Trump. We had record highs in household median income. Everybody was doing better, and we had an anti-war foreign policy. We have the opposite with Biden and Harris. The opposite in every way, shape, and form. But I can tell you they don't really believe, they don't want Medicare for all. Democrats only do these things. They only say these things to raise money from the far left and to get them to vote Democrat every 4 years. They haven't passed any single-payer healthcare bill for a reason, because they're lying to their constituents.
Even insuring illegal immigrants, again, the wide open border has had huge effects. And here she says everybody should have insurance.
Yes. She wants to have the government take over everything on health care. Already the government does too much on.
Larry, thank you. An unrealized gain tax will cause a Great Depression and market plummet. Businesses will leave the U.S. permanently. I agree. I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%. And I think that that's exactly why you will have, we'll probably have a market tanking right before I think the market will tank. The stock market will collapse in October, likely right before November 5th. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back at 10 p.m. tonight. Be here for the second live stream. Thanks, everybody, for making this live stream amazing. God bless you all. Hit subscribe to this channel right now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're new. Trump is going to win. I give him 95, 96% chance of winning. The issue, ladies and gentlemen, is the Supreme Court, the two issues, Supreme Court and the stock market and the economy, which relates directly to Biden and Harris's policies. Unrealized capital gains, unrealized capital gains tax, which is the absolute worst thing you could ever do, which would cement Trump's victory because the market would collapse right before November 5th. But it would cost a lot of people a lot of money, retirement savings, all of that. The point, ladies and gentlemen, is there are two things. Forget the polls. It's Supreme Court victories, overturning the hush money conviction, which was completely unconstitutional. We talked about that. And the stock market and the economy and Harris's terrible economic policies. Price fixing alone would destroy the U.S. economy like it did the Soviet Union. But